Story 5. The Treasure of Elborah. Once, in the small village of Hwalactan, there lived a young girl named Elborah. Now Elborah was not like the other children of her village. She had been born sickly and was not able to run and play and make mischief as most children are apt to do. Too much movement exhausted her, sunlight burned her skin, and the smell and sounds of the world outside of her family's home were often too overwhelming for her. As a result, poor Elborah spent most of her time in the family's sitting room, immersed in the books and scrolls her father, who was a fairly successful merchant, would bring home from his travels. She devoured information of any kind, from knowledge of different cultures and languages to geography and astronomy. She read and read until she became somewhat of a living library. She could name every major natural landmark and its significance, from the edge of the Caspian Sea to the far reaches of the Darklands. Was proficient in most of the major languages spoken by the inhabitants of Earia, and could chart the course of the night sky and the passing of the seasons with a startling degree of accuracy. By the time of Elborah's 12th name day, she was seen by all in the village as an invaluable source of information and knowledge. Everyone, from the farmers who grew the crops and tended the village's livestock, to the council of elders who were responsible for making the decisions concerning the people of Hwalactan, came to her, seeking guidance. One cold winter day, Elborah and her family were awoken shortly before dawn by a loud banging upon their door. When her father allowed the person in, they were shocked to see that the man, Thorvil, a trapper who specialized in selling hides and furs, was breathing heavily and covered in many small wounds. His clothes were ragged and torn, his beard and hair unwashed and unkempt. Elborah's mother busied herself with preparing a pot of hot tea and some sandwiches for the exhausted trapper, while her father took him gently by the crook of his arm and led him to a large, comfy armchair by the fire. After politely but quickly declining their offers of refreshment and comfort, Thorvil asked to see Elborah, stating that it was a matter of utmost importance. After her father and mother calmed the man down somewhat and had him securely settled in the chair with a cup of tea in one hand and a sandwich in the other, Elborah was fetched from her room. Thorvil quickly explained the reason for his unexpected visit. He had recently been trading with some members of the Hwalactan tribe, a stern, hardy people that lived along the shore of the great frozen lake far to the north. Normally, the Hwalactan people would trade seal meat and blubber, as well as some very rare herbs and roots that only grew around their frozen domain. He was surprised on this visit by a change of trade goods. Instead of the usual bundles of herbs and neatly wrapped piles of seal meat, the people of the frozen lake had instead presented a myriad of odd objects. Hand-carved spoons made from bone, necklaces of brightly colored beads, bowls and mugs decorated with runes and designs native to their people, and many other small personal items. Thorvil was unable to speak their language, knowing no more than a handful of their words, and did not understand what each person had said as they laid their item before him. They all, however, had a look of profound sorrow on their faces, with several of them openly weeping as they took their place back among their own. Unsure of what to do, Thorvil began to collect the items into several sacks that were slung over the side of his pack mule. He figured that they had, for whatever reason, decided to change the arrangements that had been in place for so many years, and that, for this time at least, he would allow the strange trade. As he began to gather the items, a low murmur of anger rose from the crowd of people that surrounded him. When he finished and began to lead his mule away towards home, the low murmurs turned into loud shouts and screams of fury. He was pelted with scraps of food, trash, stones, anything the Hwalactans could get their hands on. Fearing for his safety, Thorvil jumped onto his mule and galloped away as fast as the poor creature could manage. For 2 days and nights they ran, stopping only when necessary to eat and drink. Upon reaching the safety of Hwalactan, Thorvil then left his lathered, exhausted steed at the stables, making sure to provide it with hay and water aplenty, as well as giving it several apples and hugging its huge heaving neck in gratitude for its tireless service. He then hurriedly made his way to the home of Elborah and her family. Elborah had listened intently to Thorvil's tale, only interrupting to ask him to clarify or repeat some details of his ordeal. When he had finished and taken a gulp of tea and a large bite of his sandwich, Elborah spoke. She told him some of the history of the Hwalactan people, how they and their ancestors managed to carve out an existence in such an inhospitable and harsh environment, and how, to them, honor, kindness, and discipline meant everything. Once they reached an agreement, these people would honor it to the very best of their ability, only deviating when there was no other choice. Their act of presenting the trader with personal items was meant to be a symbol of good faith, not an actual trade. To them, giving up items that were of great personal value was viewed as an act of credit. They were essentially saying that even though they were not able to provide him with their usual trade items, they were willing to part with what was most important to each of them instead. She went on to explain that in their culture, this act was meant to be taken as a token of good faith, that, although they were not able to fulfill the agreed-upon trade this time, they were instead willing to give up their personal treasures in exchange for his continued business. She then told him of the proper way to respond to their ritual. He should have bowed his head and accepted the gifts gratefully. Then, he should have presented them with a personal item of his own, something that he normally would never willingly part with. The trade would then go on as normal, with Thorvil giving the Hwalactans their normal supply of skins and then going on his way. The gifts were a promise of sorts. Thorvil would protect their treasured personal items until his next visit, and they would do the same for his. Upon his return, the people of the village would gift him twice the normal cost of the usual trade. He and they would then exchange their items back again. When Thorvil took their belongings without offering something of his own, the Hwalactans took it as a grave slight on their honor. To them, it was as if he said he did not trust them to safeguard and return his belongings, that he was happy to take their treasures as ransom, but would not allow them the same respect. Elborah's explanation was interrupted by a loud clamor from outside. The town bell was being rung urgently, its peals ringing out loud and clear. In a rush, everyone in the room proceeded outside, curious as to what was happening. In the center of the village stood the village elder, Harris, and as he rang the bell, he shouted, "Riders approaching fast, a large group." The entirety of the village was clustered around him. In the not-so-far distance, a huge dust cloud could be seen floating towards the village. As it drew closer, the sound of many heavy hooves could be heard. their galloping strides sounding like thunder against the ground. The leader of the group called a halt, roughly 20 feet from where the villagers were standing. He was a tall, bulky man, wearing a heavy coat of gray and white furs. He clutched a bone-tipped spear in his right hand and the reins of his steed in his left. The men arrayed behind him were similarly attired, seemingly ready for violence and war. He barked out a short call to the village elder in the language of the Hwalactan. Harris did not understand and looked about helplessly until spotting Elborah and motioning for her to come closer. She made her way quickly to the elder's side to translate. "He is asking for Thorvil," she explained. "He is here to address the dishonor that was shown to his kin." She then turned her attention to the waiting warlord, speaking to him in his tongue. "Thorvil did not intend to offend you. He was merely ignorant of the customs of your tribe. Please, there is no need for violence. We are friends to your people and do not wish for there to be any unpleasantness between us." "A little girl," the large man grumbled into his beard. "That is who you have all chosen to speak for you." He turned and spat upon the ground. "We are here for the traitor. If he thinks so lowly of our honor, we shall take all that he has and be done with dealings with him in the future. That is our price for his slights upon me and mine." After quickly translating, Elborah turned back to the leader of the Hwalactans. Before she could speak again, she was interrupted by the bright rays of the morning sun rising from behind the hills that nestled her small village. Elborah's skin immediately began turning red, the gentle rays feeling like fire against her delicate alabaster skin. Fighting through the pain, she continued to speak, tears rolling down her face. "Please, good sir, he did not know. He speaks most highly of your people and how you have treated with him in the past." Before she could say any more, Elborah fell to the ground, covering her unprotected face with her arms, unable to endure the light of the sun, which was growing ever stronger by the second. Her father immediately grabbed her up in his arms, cradling her head against his chest, and rushed her back inside their home. The group of Hwalactans dismounted and followed them, looking slightly ashamed and worried for the poor girl. Inside, with the shades drawn over the two windows, Elborah's father tended to the small blisters that now marked her face. He dabbed at them with a cool, damp washcloth while whispering words of comfort to her, still cradled in his arms. A quiet knock came from the door. After gently setting Elborah down in her favorite chair, he then turned and cracked the door ever so slightly open, only allowing the smallest sliver of sunlight to enter their home. The leader of the Hwalactan stood outside, his face tight with concern. "Ishtekla, Shar nak Boshentline." He spoke softly and quietly. Elborah's father did not understand the man's words, but allowed him in, sensing that the man was concerned for his daughter and did not mean any harm. He seated himself on the floor before Elborah and crossed his legs beneath him. My men and I did not wish to scare you," he began. "We are here for the traitor. Our business is with him. We would not have it said that the warriors of the Hwalactan are cowards who would harass and cause distress to a defenseless child. Please understand this and accept our most humble apologies." He then bowed his head to the girl in a gesture of humility and regret. "Have no fear for your honor," Elborah began. "My sickness is what has laid me low, I harbor no ill will towards you or your people." Gratefully, the big man raised his head and stared into her young but very intelligent eyes. He spoke again, in the same soft tones as before. "The traitor, Thorvil he is called, has caused great insult to my people. Whether it was intentional or not is beside the point. It must be redressed, or the Hwalactan will never allow him again to set foot on our land." "I understand," Elborah responded. "The Hwalactan are a proud people with a long history. I have spoken to Thorvil about your customs, and I have explained the misunderstanding between you all." She then turned to her father, who had been standing quietly beside her, and asked him to please fetch Thorvil. In short order, he came, glancing nervously at the large man seated before Elborah. She explained to him again what must be done to mend the rift between him and the Hwalactan, that he must surrender something precious of his own to balance the scales. "But I have no such item with me," exclaimed Thorvil. "I do not travel with any items of importance or sentimental value while I am out trading. Unfortunately, I store any such items at my home in Lark's Landing. It is a journey of some months, but I could be there and back in roughly half a year, bringing something to your village to exchange. Would that be acceptable to you, good sir?" After Elborah translated Thorvil's words to the other man, he shook his head sadly. "If I were to let you leave for so long a time, my people would say that you had tricked me and run off with our treasures. They would brand you an enemy of the Hwalactan and attack you on sight should you ever set foot on our lands again."
"What if I were to assume his debt?" inquired Elborah. "Would I then be able to present an item of my own in his stead?"
The big man sat thoughtfully for a moment, scratching his short, rust-colored beard. "I believe that would be acceptable," he muttered. "Allow me a moment to speak to my comrades outside, please." After a brief discussion, the man returned. The decision had been unanimous. Elborah could assume the debt of Thorvil and then pay the balance. With a nod and a sad smile, Elborah got up from her seat and made her way to her bedroom. She came back with a small, red-backed book clutched tightly in her hands.
"The bestiary of Belgamon the Quaint," she told the man. "The very first book my father brought home to me after I learned how to read. I have read it so many times that I can recite it nearly word for word. This book means more to me than anything else I own. I will trust you with it, as you have all trusted Thorvil with your own treasures."
The leader bowed his head and graciously accepted the book from the sad-eyed girl. "As the chieftain of the Hwalactan people, I, Garzi, will make a solemn oath to you. This book will be placed in our most secure treasure room. The room is protected at all times by 5 armed guards. The walls are built of stones 3 feet thick, and the one door is made of heavy steel. Your treasure will come to no harm, young lady." He then held out his large, calloused hand towards her. Elborah smiled and shook his hand.
"Thank you, Garzi. I have no doubt that it will be quite safe."
The end.